Welcome to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy true stories that linger in your mind long after the lights go out, please subscribe, give this a like, and drop a comment below. Your support helps bring more tales like this to life. Now, settle in and listen closely. On the last evening of September in the year 2007, as the sun bled amber across the pine-cloaked ridges of Yellowstone National Park, a lone backpacker named Talia Vale vanished without a trace. She was not lost in the usual sense. No frantic calls for help, no abandoned campsite, no snapped branches or scattered gear. Only her journal remained, tucked beneath a mossy log near the Firehole River, its final page smeared with something dark and rust-colored that the rangers refused to identify publicly. Talia, a 29-year-old ethnobotanist from Portland, had arrived in Yellowstone 3 days earlier under gray skies and a persistent drizzle that clung to the earth like a warning. Her purpose was simple: document rare alpine flora blooming late in the season near the Norris Geyser Basin. But locals who glimpsed her at the Canyon Village store remembered more than her scientific tools. They recalled the way she scanned the tree line, as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows between the lodgepole pines. Her name, Talia, was uncommon enough to stick in memory, soft-spoken yet deliberate, like wind brushing through dry sagebrush. She wore a faded olive-green jacket, boots already scuffed from miles off-trail, and carried a brass compass that had belonged to her grandfather, a park ranger who once patrolled these very grounds in the 1970s. Friends said she believed the land held echoes, sounds that weren't wind, shapes that weren't elk, silences that weren't empty. On that final day, according to trailhead sign and logs and grainy footage from a distant wildlife camera near Gibbon Meadows, Talia set out at 7:43 in the morning. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and sulfur from nearby hot springs. Mist curled over the meadows like ghostly fingers, and the only human sounds came from a distant road crew repairing the Grand Loop Highway. By noon, the camera showed nothing but a bull elk standing sentinel at the river's edge. By sunset, even the elk was gone. Search teams combed over 40 square miles in the following weeks. Helicopters buzzed over Shoshone Lake. Dogs tracked her scent as far as the Obsidian Cliff trailhead, then lost it as though she'd stepped into thin air. Rangers found no footprints leading away from the journal's location. No signs of struggle. No dropped water bottle, no torn map, not even a snapped twig out of place. But what unsettled investigators most was the entry in her journal, dated the night before she disappeared. The shadows here don't behave like they should. They linger after the sun's gone. They move against the wind. Last night, near Sentinel Meadows, I saw one that looked almost human. Tall, too tall, standing perfectly still between the firs. When I called out, it didn't answer. It didn't flee. It just watched. And when I turned my back for just a moment, it was gone. But the feeling stayed, like eyes on my neck long after the trees swallowed the light. Locals whispered about the Whisper Men. Old stories passed down from fur trappers and crow scouts, beings that walked the high country when the veil between worlds thinned in late autumn. Park rangers dismissed it as folklore. Yet more than one seasoned guide admitted to avoiding certain valleys after dusk, especially where the thermal steam rose thickest and the light bent strangely through the air. Then, in early November, a hiker reported finding Talia's compass near the banks of the Yellowstone River, just south of Towerfall. It was cold to the touch, though the day had been warm. The needle spun slowly, lazily, as if confused by something beneath the earth. When rangers tested it later in the lab, it pointed steadily, not north, but toward a remote drainage in the Absaroka Range, a place so rugged and seldom visited it didn't even appear on most tourist maps. To this day, Talia Vale is listed as missing, presumed deceased. But every autumn, around the same week she vanished, park staff report odd disturbances near the Firehole corridor, unexplained footprints that vanish mid-stride, distant whistles with no source, and once, a voice on a ranger's radio that whispered a single word, "Talia." No one answered, and no one ever will, unless you count the shadows that still move against the wind, waiting. 2 years after Talia Vale vanished, another disappearance unfolded in the same stretch of wilderness. This time not a solitary researcher, but a father and his teenage son on a late-season camping trip. Their names were Corwin and Ellery Hayes, from Bozeman, Montana. They'd planned a simple 3-day trek along the Mary Mountain Trail, a route known for its isolation and sweeping views of the Hayden Valley. They left their truck parked near the Nez Perce Creek trailhead on the morning of October 3, 2009. They never returned. Park rangers found their tents still standing, zippered shut, with 2 sleeping bags neatly arranged inside. A half-eaten bag of trail mix sat on a rock beside a cold camp stove. The fire ring held only gray ash. There were no signs of animal intrusion, no overturned gear, no frantic scrawls in the dirt. It was as if the two had simply stepped away for a moment and never came back. But unlike Talia's case, this one carried an eerie echo. Tucked inside Corwin's waterproof journal, beneath a pressed leaf and a crude sketch of Old Faithful, was a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "The shadows followed us from the moment we crossed the river. They're not ours." The detail sent shivers through the Yellowstone search team. No official report had ever used the phrase, "the shadows," in connection to Talia's journal, not publicly, at least. Yet here it was, repeated almost verbatim by a man who'd never met her, who'd never even filed a missing persons report referencing her case. Detective Mara Lynn, a seasonal investigator with the National Park Service, couldn't shake the coincidence. She'd reviewed Talia's file during her first year with the agency, haunted by the image of that compass spinning toward nothing. Now, standing in the Hayes abandoned campsite under a sky streaked with early snow clouds, she felt that same cold prickle along her spine, the sense of being watched from just beyond perception. Mara wasn't prone to superstition. She'd grown up in Chicago, studied forensic anthropology at Northwestern, and trusted evidence over instinct. But Yellowstone had a way of eroding certainty. She'd heard the old-timers talk about thin places, spots where the boundary between the seen and unseen grew porous. Most dismissed it as campfire yarns. Yet here, in this land of geysers and grizzlies, where the earth itself hissed and groaned like a living thing, even skeptics sometimes lowered their voices after dark. She requested access to the park's restricted audio archives. Buried among routine radio logs from 2007 was a 37-second clip recorded on the night Talia disappeared. Static. Then a whisper, not distorted, not garbled, but clear, almost gentle, "Don't look back." Followed by a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers against tree bark. The transmission originated from Talia's registered emergency beacon frequency, but the device was never activated. Now, with the Hayes case unfolding, Mara noticed a pattern. Both parties had entered the park during late September or early October, the time when daylight wanes quickly and mist rises thick from the geothermal basins. Both had camped within 5 miles of the Firehole River. Both described, in writing or in passing comments to locals, unusual shadow activity, elongated forms moving independently of light sources, silhouettes that lingered at the edge of vision even in full sun. Mara interviewed Ellery's best friend, a quiet boy named Tavian who'd helped pack their gear. He recalled Ellery showing him a photo on his phone the night before they left, a blurry shot taken near the Fairy Falls trailhead. "It looked like a person," Tavian said, "but stretched too tall, like it was pulled upward." Ellery said it wasn't there when he took the picture. It just appeared later when he zoomed in. The photo was never recovered. Ellery's phone vanished with him. Then, in early November, a hiker near the Sentinel Meadows reported hearing voices in the fog, 2 distinct tones, one deep and urgent, the other young and frightened. When the hiker called out, the voices stopped. But when he turned to leave, he felt something brush against his jacket, light, almost feathery, though the wind was still. He ran. Mara visited Talia's mother in Portland. The woman, frail but sharp-eyed, handed her a box of personal effects the park had returned years ago. Inside, among dried wildflowers and pencil sketches of lichen, was a folded map. On the back, in Talia's neat script, were coordinates and a note. They don't take you. They invite you. And if you listen too long, you answer. Mara brought the map to a retired geologist who'd worked in Yellowstone since the 1980s. He studied it in silence, then pointed to a spot deep in the Beckler region, a seldom visited corner of the park near the Targhee National Forest. This area, he said slowly, has the highest concentration of thermal anomalies in the park. Not just heat, magnetic distortions, infrasound pulses, even odd radio wave reflections. We used to call it the hollow during surveys. Equipment malfunctions there. Compasses go haywire. GPS drops out. He paused, then added, and in the old days, the Shoshone refused to hunt there after the first frost. Said the land dreamed when it was cold, and its dreams walked. On December 1st, Mara organized a small, unofficial reconnaissance team, 2 trusted rangers, a thermal imaging specialist, and herself. They entered the Beckler region at dawn, snow dusting the ground like ash. By midday, their GPS units flickered and died. Compass needles spun idly. The thermal camera showed cold spots where none should be, pools of negative heat beneath the trees. Then, near a steaming fumarole veiled in vapor, they found it. A child's woolen glove, damp but not frozen. Ellery's. Beside it, half buried in moss, was Talia's brass compass, still pointing toward the heart of the hollow. As they stood there, a sound broke the silence, not wind, not animal. It was a low, harmonic hum, vibrating through the earth itself, rising in pitch until it resonated in their chests. The rangers froze. The specialist whispered, "That's not natural. That's structured." And then, through the mist, shapes began to form. Not solid, not human, but undeniable. Tall, fluid silhouettes, 3, maybe 4, standing motionless between the lodgepole pines. They cast no shadows. They reflected no light. They simply were. And as the team watched, paralyzed, one of them tilted its head, as if recognizing them. Mara raised her hand, not in fear, but in something closer to sorrow. She understood then. Talia hadn't been taken. Corwin and Ellery hadn't been abducted. They had crossed a threshold, one that only opened when the light grew thin and the land grew quiet. And perhaps, in that other place, they were still walking, still watching, still whispering names into the steam. The team retreated without a word. No photos were taken. No official report was filed. Some truths, Mara decided, were too heavy for paperwork. But if you hike near the Beckler region in late autumn, when frost feathers the ferns and the geysers breathe like sleeping giants, listen closely. You might hear it, the soft crunch of boots on dry pine needles, followed by a whisper that isn't yours. And if you do, don't look back. In the spring of 2011, a graduate student named Orla Fenwick arrived in Yellowstone with a research grant from the University of Wyoming and a singular obsession: to map the acoustic anomalies reported in the Beckler region. She wasn't interested in folklore or missing persons. She wanted data. Infrasound, electromagnetic fields, thermal vents, and how they might interact to create auditory illusions. Rational. Scientific. Orla chose the name Project Echo Veil for her study, a title her advisor found poetic but unnecessary. She didn't care. She'd read the fragmented reports, Mara Lynn's sealed field notes, the cryptic journal entries, the hiker testimonies, And while she refused to entertain supernatural theories, she couldn't deny the consistency of the accounts. Too many witnesses, too many similar descriptions, across too many years. She set up base near Cave Falls, far enough from tourist trails to ensure quiet, close enough to vehicle access for resupply. Her equipment was state-of-the-art: directional microphones, ground vibration sensors, a portable magnetometer, and a drone outfitted with thermal and LiDAR scanning. She worked alone, by choice. Few understood her intensity. Fewer still knew that her younger brother, Callum, had vanished on a solo hike in the Ozarks back in 2004, another case closed with no answers, no body, only a backpack left neatly propped against a riverbank. Perhaps that was why she didn't flinch when, on her 12th night in the field, her audio software flagged an anomaly. It began just past midnight. The wind had died. The only sound was the distant gurgle of the Falls River. Then, through her high-gain parabolic mic, came a low, rhythmic tapping, identical to the one recorded on Talia Vale's emergency frequency years before. Orla's pulse quickened, but she stayed calm. She cross-referenced with her seismic sensor. No ground movement. She checked wind speed, 0. She activated the drone. As it lifted into the mist-shrouded canopy, the thermal feed showed 3 cold masses, human-shaped, but stretched vertically, standing in a clearing 300 yards northeast of her tent. The drone's LiDAR registered them as solid objects. But when Orla zoomed in visually, the camera showed only empty forest. She recorded everything. Voice trembling only slightly, she narrated, "Thermal and LiDAR confirm anomalous presence. Visual spectrum shows nothing. No animal heat signature. No known geological explanation for sustained cold spots of this magnitude." Then the tapping stopped. A new sound emerged, faint, melodic, like a child humming a lullaby through cupped hands. Orla recognized it instantly. It was the same tune her grandmother used to sing to Callum. A Welsh folk song. Suar Gan. She hadn't heard it in years. No one in Yellowstone should know it. Her hands froze over the controls. The drone hovered, its feed flickering. On the thermal display, one of the figures turned slowly toward the camera. Then, impossibly, it raised an arm, not toward the drone, but toward Orla's camp. She recalled the drone immediately. The next morning, she found her equipment tampered with. Not damaged, rearranged. Her compass rested on top of her sleeping bag, needle spinning lazily. Her field journal lay open to a blank page, though she always closed it. And in the margin, written in pencil with a hand that wasn't hers, were 2 words: "Callum waits." Orla packed everything that afternoon. Not out of fear, she told herself, but protocol. She needed to consult her department. Verify data integrity. Yet as she drove toward West Yellowstone, the radio crackled with static, and beneath it, faint but clear, the same lullaby. She didn't return to the university. Instead, she drove straight to Bozeman and knocked on Mara Lynn's door. Mara, now working part-time as a consultant for wilderness risk assessment, listened without interruption. When Orla finished, Mara poured 2 cups of black coffee and said, "You heard it too, didn't you? The invitation." Orla nodded, eyes red-rimmed but dry. It knew his name. It knew the song. Mara opened a locked drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were copies of Talia's final journal page, the Hayes campsite photos, and a new document, dated just last month. A ranger on night patrol near Sentinel Meadows had recorded something on his body cam. Not a figure, not a voice, but a reflection. In the still surface of a thermal pool, the camera caught the silhouettes of 3 people standing on the opposite bank: Talia, Corwin, and Ellery, facing away, watching something beyond the frame. When the ranger turned, there was no one there. "The land doesn't forget," Mara said quietly. and it doesn't release what it claims. Orla stayed in Bozeman for 3 weeks. She combed through park archives, interviewed retired staff, even tracked down Tavian Hayes, now working at a bike shop in Missoula. He hadn't spoken of his friend in years, but when Orla mentioned the lullaby, he went pale. "Ellery used to hum that," he whispered, "after his mom died. Said it made him feel like she was still near." Orla made her decision on a cold April evening. She returned to the Beckler region, not as a scientist, but as a sister. She carried no recording gear this time. Only a small leather pouch containing Callum's baby rattle and a photo of them as children at Lake of the Ozarks. She hiked deep into the hollow as dusk fell. The air grew thick with steam from hidden vents. Shadows pooled early beneath the trees, deeper than they should have been. She didn't set up camp. She simply sat on a flat stone near the same fumarole where Ellery's glove had been found, and waited. An hour passed. Then two. The stars emerged, sharp and silent. And then, a sound. Not tapping. Not humming. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching from the east. Orla didn't turn. She whispered, "Callum?" The footsteps stopped. The mist curled around her ankles like breath. And then, from directly behind her, a voice, soft, hesitant, achingly familiar, said, "Orla, you came." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't move. "Are you safe?" The pause. Then, "Not safe, but whole." They showed us the other side of silence. The place where voices don't fade. Where names stay alive. "Who are they?" she asked. "The ones who remember," the voice replied. "The land remembers everything. Especially those who listen." Orla closed her eyes. "Can I stay?" Silence stretched. Then, gently, "You can visit, but you must always leave before dawn. The veil thins at night, but it closes at sunrise. And if you're still here when the light returns, you become part of the memory." She stayed until the first pale streaks touched the eastern peaks. When she finally rose, the mist had cleared. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. But in her hand, the leather pouch was gone. In its place lay a smooth, warm stone, veined with quartz that glowed faintly in the low light. Orla walked out of the hollow just as the sun crested the ridge. She never published her findings. She left the university, moved to a cabin near Ennis, and began writing, not academic papers, but stories. True stories, she claimed, though no one could verify them. She called her newsletter The Listening Land, and in each issue, she recounted another encounter, another name, another whisper from the edge of perception. Park rangers, retired and active, began leaving anonymous notes in her mailbox. Coordinates, dates, descriptions of shapes in the steam. Orla compiled them all. She knew now that Yellowstone wasn't haunted in the way people imagined. It wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It was aware. And it called to those who carried unresolved silence within them, the grieving, the lost, the longing. To this day, if you hike alone near the Beckler River in late autumn, you might find a smooth quartz stone resting on a trailside log. Pick it up and it will be warm. Hold it long enough, and you might hear a whisper, not of warning, but of welcome. And if you listen closely enough, you might just answer. By the summer of 2014, Orla Fenwick's quiet newsletter had grown into something far beyond her expectations. The Listening Land now reached tens of thousands of readers across the country, backpackers, amateur historians, paranormal investigators, and even a few skeptical scientists drawn in by her meticulous documentation. She never claimed to prove anything. She only asked people to listen. Then, in early August, a letter arrived, not by email, but in a hand-addressed envelope postmarked from Cook City, Montana, just outside Yellowstone's northeast entrance. The paper was thick, yellowed at the edges, and smelled faintly of sage and damp earth. Inside was a single page covered in tight, looping script that seemed older than the ink should allow. You speak of the hollow as if it began with Talia. It did not. It began with us. We were here before the park, before the railroads, before the names on your maps. We walked the thermal valleys when the earth sang louder. We knew the shadows were not absence, but presence. The land does not call the lost. It calls the remembers. And we remember everything. The keepers of the veil. There was no signature, no return address. But tucked behind the letter was a small, folded map on animal hide, genuine, Orla confirmed with a conservator, marked with symbols that didn't match any known Native American writing system in the region. Yet the landmarks aligned eerily with thermal hotspots, magnetic anomalies, and every documented disappearance since the park's founding in 1872. Orla took the map to Dr. Elias Crow, a retired linguist and ethnographer who had spent 40 years studying indigenous oral traditions of the Northern Rockies. He'd worked with Crow, Shoshone, and Blackfeet elders, and though cautious, he agreed to examine it. He studied the hide for 3 days in silence. On the 4th morning, he called Orla, his voice unsteady. "This isn't just a map," he said. "It's a covenant. These symbols, they're not words. They're names, personal names, and each one corresponds to a person who vanished, but also to a place where the veil thins." He pointed to a symbol near the headwaters of the Beckler River. "This one, it's Talia. Not her given name, but the name the land gave her after she crossed. They do that, you see. They rename the ones who stay." Orla's breath caught. "Corwin and Ellery?" He nodded slowly. 2 names, father and son, bound even in memory. "And Callum?" Dr. Crow looked at her, his eyes filled with something between sorrow and awe. "His symbol is there too, smaller but bright. He's guiding others now." Orla asked the question that had haunted her since that night in the hollow. "Are they alive?" The old man sighed. "Not as we understand life. But they exist. In the resonance. In the silence between sounds. In the stillness that watches you when you think you're alone in the woods. That's not emptiness, Orla. That's attention." That fall, Orla organized a quiet gathering. Not a tour, not an expedition, but an invitation. She invited only those who had lost someone in or near Yellowstone under unexplained circumstances. 10 responded. Among them was Mara Lynn, now retired from official duty but still drawn to the mystery, Tavian Hayes, who hadn't set foot in the park since Ellery vanished, and a woman named Lenore Voss, whose husband, a geologist, had disappeared near Shoshone Lake in 2001 after reporting echoes that answered. They met at dawn on the 1st day of October at the Beckler Ranger Station. No permits, no gear beyond water, blankets, and an offering, a personal item tied to the one they'd lost. Orla carried Callum's favorite hiking sock. Tavian brought Ellery's dog tag. Lenore clutched a smooth river stone her husband had given her on their honeymoon. They walked in silence, following the hide map's guidance, deeper into the hollow than any of them had ever gone. The air grew heavy, not with heat, but with quiet, a silence so complete it pressed against the eardrums. Birds didn't sing. Insects didn't hum. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. At sunset, they reached a natural amphitheater ringed by steaming fumaroles and ancient lodgepole pines blackened by old fires. In the center stood a flat stone, warm to the touch, veined with the same glowing quartz Orla had received years before. Orla placed her offering on the stone. One by one, the others did the same. Then, as twilight deepened, the mist rose, not from the ground, but from the air itself, coalescing into faint, shimmering outlines. Not solid, not human, but unmistakable. Talia stood first, her silhouette taller than memory, her posture calm. Beside her, Corwin with a hand on Ellery's shoulder. Further back, figures Orla didn't recognize. Men in old ranger uniforms, women in long skirts, a boy in suspenders from another century. And there, near the front, smaller but radiant, Callum. He smiled, a flicker of light in the gathering dark, and held out his hand toward Orla. She didn't move forward. She knew the rule. Dawn would come, and those who stayed past sunrise became part of the memory. But for one long moment, the veil was thin enough for both sides to see. Lenore sobbed softly. "He's peaceful," she whispered. Mara closed her eyes. "They're not trapped. They're keeping watch." Tavian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small harmonica, the one Ellery used to play by campfire. He didn't play it. He just held it up. In response, from the mist, came the faintest echo of a familiar tune. "You Are My Sunshine," the song Ellery always played for his little sister. They stayed until the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. As the light grew, the figures dimmed, not vanishing, but folding back into the land, into the shadows between the trees, the steam rising from the earth, the silence that lingers after a name is spoken. The group left the hollow without speaking. They never spoke of what they saw, not to reporters, not to researchers, not even to each other again. But each carried a new understanding. Yellowstone wasn't a place of danger. It was a threshold, a sanctuary for the unresolved, a library of voices that refused to be forgotten. Orla returned to her cabin and wrote one final issue of The Listening Land. In it, she didn't describe the gathering. She simply wrote. She closed the newsletter that day, but she left her cabin door unlocked. And on quiet nights, when the wind carries the scent of pine and sulfur down from the high country, travelers sometimes leave small tokens on her porch. A smooth stone, a pressed flower, a child's mitten. She never removes them, because she knows the land is still speaking, and someone, somewhere, is always listening. In the spring of 2016, a quiet tremor rippled beneath the surface of Yellowstone, not a seismic event recorded by the USDS, but something subtler, felt only by those attuned to the rhythms of the land. Rangers on night patrol near the Mary Mountain Trail reported an unusual stillness, as if the very air had paused mid-breath. Thermal pools that normally bubbled with predictable regularity fell silent for hours at a time. And in the Beckler region, the mist no longer rose at dusk. It rose at dawn instead, thin, silver, and strangely warm to the touch. Orla Fenwick noticed the shift immediately. She hadn't published in 2 years, but she still walked the edges of the hollow every full moon, leaving offerings and listening. Now, the silence felt different. Not empty, anticipatory. Then, in May, a young park volunteer named Kaylin Rose stumbled upon something in the Lamar Valley that defied explanation. While clearing debris after a late snowmelt, he found a satchel half buried in mud near a dried creek bed. It was old, leather cracked with age, brass buckles tarnished green, but inside, everything was pristine. A field notebook dated April 1923, a pocket watch frozen at 3 minutes past midnight, and a photograph. The photo showed 5 people standing before the Old Faithful Inn, dressed in early 20th century attire. One man wore a ranger's badge. A woman held a botanical press. 2 boys, one no older than 10, stood at the front, grinning beneath wide-brimmed hats. On the back, in faded ink, "Last day together. The land calls us home." Kaylin brought the satchel to the archives, but no records matched the names he found in the notebook. Elias Whitmore, botanist, Eleanor Pike, cartographer, their sons, Silas and Jonah, and Ranger Hollis Granger. All 5 had been listed as departed Yellowstone in park logs, but no departure routes, no train tickets, no further correspondence. They simply ceased to exist in official history after April 29, 1923. The discovery reignited whispers. A historian from the University of Montana claimed the group had been part of a secret geological survey expedition searching for geothermal energy sources. But the notebook contained no scientific data, only sketches of shadowed figures in the trees, notes about the singing hollows, and a recurring phrase, "We hear them calling through the steam." Orla heard about the find from Mara Lynn, who now served as an unofficial keeper of the park's hidden history. When Orla saw the photograph, her hands trembled. In the background, just beyond the porch railing, almost lost in the grain of the print, stood a sixth figure, tall, indistinct, but unmistakably watching. "They were called," Orla said, "just like the others." Mara nodded. "The hollow doesn't care about the century. It only cares about the silence inside you." That summer, Kalen, unable to let go of the mystery, returned to the creek bed with a metal detector. He found nothing, but as he sat on a sun-warmed rock to rest, he heard it. A child's voice, clear and close, whispering, "Look under the root." Turned. No one was there. But beneath the gnarled base of a fallen pine, half covered in moss, lay a small tin box. Inside was a collection of quartz stones, each warm, each faintly glowing, and a note written on brittle paper. "We are not gone. We are listening. Bring your silence. Leave your name." The keepers. Kalen didn't report the find. Instead, he drove to Ennis and knocked on Orla's door. She listened to his story without interruption. Then she took him to her study, where she kept a wooden chest lined with velvet. Inside were dozens of similar stones, each labeled with a date, a name, a place. Talia Vale, Corwin and Ellery Hayes, Callum Fenwick, Lenore's husband, Daniel Voss. And now, 5 more names from 1923. They are anchors, Orla explained. Not graves, not memorials. Anchors. The land uses them to hold the veil open, for those who need to cross, even for a moment. Kalen stayed for 3 days. On the 3rd night, under a waxing moon, Orla took him to the edge of the hollow. She didn't go in. She only stood at the tree line and said, "If you carry a silence that won't fade, the land will answer. But be careful. It doesn't give back what it keeps." Kalen returned to Yellowstone a changed man. He began leaving small quartz stones at trailheads where disappearances had occurred, not as warnings, but as beacons. Hikers started finding them, warm in their palms, and though most dismissed them as odd geology, a few felt something else. A moment of peace, a sense of being seen, a whisper that sounded like a loved one's voice. Then, in the fall of 2017, something unprecedented happened. A woman named Dr. Naomi Voss, the daughter of Lenore and Daniel Voss, arrived at the park with a team of acoustic engineers and a proposal approved by the National Park Service to conduct a non-invasive sonic resonance study of the Beckler region. Officially, it was about geothermal activity. Unofficially, Naomi had grown up hearing her mother's stories of the hollow. She didn't believe in spirits, but she believed in patterns. Using low-frequency emitters and hypersensitive hydrophones placed in thermal pools, her team recorded something astonishing. At precisely 11:57 p.m. every night, the Earth emitted a harmonic sequence, a series of tones that, when slowed and layered, formed a human voice speaking multiple names in overlapping whispers. Talia, Corwin, Callum, Silas, Jonah. When Naomi played the audio for her mother, Lenore wept. "That's Daniel's voice," she said. "He's saying their names, so they won't be forgotten." The study was quietly shelved. Not because the data was flawed, but because it confirmed something the Park Service had long suspected. Yellowstone wasn't just a geological wonder. It was a psychological and acoustic archive, shaped by grief, memory, and the human need for continuity. Orla, now in her late 40s, watched these developments from afar. She no longer needed to walk the hollow to feel its presence. It lived in the quiet moments, the pause before a bird sings, the hush between heartbeats, the way mist curls around a pine at dawn. But in early 2019, a letter arrived that pulled her back. It was from a boy named Isaiah Crow, the great-grandson of Dr. Elias Crow. He wrote that his grandfather had left him a key and a single instruction: when the steam rises at dawn, go to the stone. She will be waiting. Orla knew what it meant. She returned to the hollow one last time on the morning of October 1st. Isaiah was there, just 15, eyes wide with wonder and fear. In his hand, he held his grandfather's final journal. He said the keepers were growing stronger, Isaiah said, that more people are listening now, and that the veil might not just thin, it might tear. Orla placed a hand on his shoulder. The land doesn't tear, she said softly. It breathes. And sometimes, when enough hearts ache in the same silence, it opens its eyes. As the sun rose, the mist parted, not to reveal figures, but to reveal sound. A chorus of voices, gentle and layered, filled the clearing. Not speaking names, singing them. A lullaby, a hymn, a memory made audible. Isaiah closed his eyes and smiled. They're happy, he whispered. Orla knew then that her role was changing. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a bridge. Years later, after Orla passed quietly in her sleep at the age of 62, hikers began reporting a new presence near the Beckler River. Not a shadow, not a voice, but a woman in a faded green jacket, sitting on a warm stone at dawn, leaving quartz stones for those who carry silence in their hearts. And if you find one, hold it close. Because somewhere in the mist, someone is saying your name. In the autumn of 2022, 3 years after Orla Fenwick's passing, a quiet phenomenon began to ripple outward from the Beckler region. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Hikers returning from the park's remote western corridors spoke not of fear, but of comfort. They described moments of profound stillness, as if the wilderness itself had wrapped them in a silence that didn't isolate, but understood. Some claimed to have heard fragments of old songs, Su'agan, You Are My Sunshine, even hymns from the early 1900s, carried on wind that wasn't blowing. Others reported finding quartz stones not just on trails, but in their pockets, their packs, even on their pillows after a night in nearby lodges, warm and pulsing faintly as though freshly held. Park rangers, once trained to dismiss such accounts as stress-induced hallucinations or tricks of acoustics, began keeping quiet logs of their own. One veteran named Jules Mendoza wrote in his personal journal, "It's not haunting. It's hospitality. The land is offering a kind of listening we've forgotten how to do." Then, in late September, a documentary filmmaker named Riva Kessler arrived in Yellowstone with a permit to shoot a piece on acoustic ecology in protected wilderness. She had no knowledge of the hollow, no interest in the supernatural, only data, waveforms, and the science of soundscapes. But her equipment, calibrated to capture infrasound and ultrasonic frequencies, began picking up anomalies no textbook could explain. At first, she assumed interference. But when she synced her audio with thermal drone footage near Sentinel Meadows, she saw it. During moments of complete visual stillness, her microphones registered layered vocalizations, dozens of voices, speaking in overlapping whispers, forming words that shifted depending on playback speed. Slowed down, it sounded like a choir murmuring names. Sped up, it resembled children laughing in the distance. Intrigued, Riva dug into park incident reports. She found redacted files, closed cases, and a handful of unexplained disappearances stretching back over a century. But what caught her attention was a footnote in a 2019 acoustic study, Naomi Voss's work. referencing resonant memory signatures and non-local voice retention. Riva tracked down Naomi, now a professor at Montana State. Over coffee in Bozeman, Naomi hesitated, then said, "You won't find answers in data alone. The hollow doesn't speak to instruments. It speaks to absence." She told Riva about her mother, about Daniel's voice in the thermal pools, about the stones that carried warmth long after being unearthed. "It's not paranormal," Naomi insisted. "It's paralinguistic. The land encodes emotional resonance into its geology. Grief, love, longing, they leave imprints. And sometimes, under the right conditions, those imprints replay." Riva returned to the park not as a scientist, but as a seeker. She hiked alone into the Beckler region on the eve of the autumn equinox, carrying only a recorder, a notebook, and a photograph of her younger brother, Elias, who had died by suicide in 2015. She'd never spoken his name aloud in the wilderness before. But that night, sitting by a cold fire ring near the same amphitheater Orla had once visited, she whispered it into the dark. "Elias." The air stilled. Then, from the mist rising off a nearby fumarole, came a sound, not a voice, but a breath. A sigh that mirrored her own. Riva didn't move. She simply waited. Minutes passed. Then, faint but clear, a whisper. "Riva?" Tears blurred her vision. She didn't answer. She knew better than to invite, to plead, to beg for more. She only said, "I miss you." Silence. Then, softer, "I'm listening." At dawn, she found a quartz stone resting on her sleeping bag. It was warm. In her recorder, later, she discovered something she hadn't heard in real time. Beneath her own voice, beneath the whisper, a third sound, the gentle strumming of a harmonica, playing the opening notes of Edelweiss, the song she and Elias used to sing during family road trips. Riva's documentary was never finished. Instead, she uploaded a single, unedited audio file to a private server, titled only "The Listening." It contained no narration, no music, no visuals, just 90 minutes of raw sound from that night in the hollow. Within weeks, it went viral among a quiet, grieving subculture. People played it while driving, while sleeping, while sitting alone in the dark. Many reported dreams of loved ones. Others claimed to hear their own names woven into the static. The National Park Service issued a vague statement urging visitors to respect the natural soundscape and avoid spreading unverified audio content. But internally, rangers exchanged knowing glances. They'd heard the file too, and some recognized voices they thought they'd never hear again. Meanwhile, Isaiah Crow, now 23 and working as a cultural liaison between the park and local indigenous communities, began noticing something new. The quartz stones were changing. Older ones, once faintly glowing, now pulsed rhythmically, like slow heartbeats. And when held to the ear, they emitted not just warmth, but vibration, tiny, resonant hums that matched the harmonic frequencies Naomi Voss had recorded years before. Isaiah consulted with elders from the Crow Nation, who shared an old teaching. When the land grieves with you, it becomes kin. And kin do not forget. He organized a quiet ceremony near the Beckler River in early 2023, the centennial of the Whitmore Party's disappearance. No press. No spectators. Only descendants of those who had vanished or listened. Among them was Tavian Hayes, now gray-haired but steady, Naomi Voss, and a quiet woman named Marin Pike, the great-granddaughter of Eleanor Pike, the cartographer from 1923. They placed offerings on the central stone, botanical sketches, old compasses, handwritten letters never sent. As the sun set, the mist rose not from the ground, but from the river itself, swirling into shapes that held longer than mist should. And for the first time, the whispers weren't just names. They were full sentences, Thank you for remembering. We are not lost. Tell our stories. Marin Pike broke down sobbing. She knew I'd come, she whispered. My great-grandmother, she knew. Isaiah understood then what Orla had tried to teach him. The hollow was no longer just a place of passage. It was becoming a sanctuary of reciprocity. The land gave voice to the silent, and in return, the living gave memory to the vanished. It was a covenant written not in ink, but in resonance. By 2025, the phenomenon had spread beyond Yellowstone. Reports surfaced from other thin places: the Smoky Mountains, the Olympic Peninsula, even the deserts of New Mexico, of similar stones, similar whispers, similar moments of impossible recognition. Scientists called it mass psychogenic suggestion. But those who'd stood in the mist, who'd held a warm stone and heard a lost voice say their name, they knew better. And in the heart of Yellowstone, the shadows still move against the wind, not to frighten, but to remind. Because somewhere between the hiss of a geyser and the sigh of a pine, between the silence of snowfall and the song of a distant harmonica, the land is listening. And if you listen back, you might just find the one you thought you'd lost. But the listening has started to change. In the final weeks of 2025, rangers began noticing something unsettling. The quartz stones, once warm, comforting, always found in places of sorrow, now appeared in odd locations. Inside locked patrol cabins, beneath children's sleeping bags at organized youth camps, even nestled in the cup holders of parked SUVs at Canyon Village. And they were no longer just warm. They were hot. Not enough to burn, but enough to make the skin flush, the pulse quicken. And when held too long, witnesses reported sudden, vivid hallucinations, not of lost loved ones smiling in the mist, but of them standing motionless in the dark, eyes wide and unblinking, mouths slightly open as if waiting to speak, but never quite forming words. Then the whisper shifted, no longer gentle, no longer personal. Instead, a single phrase, repeated across dozens of reports, always in the same flat, hollow tone. You've listened long enough. Now it's our turn. Riva Kessler, the filmmaker, vanished in early November. Her camera was found near the Firehole River, still recording. The footage shows nothing unusual, just trees, mist, the soft gurgle of water. But the audio captures 43 minutes of silence, followed by a slow, wet inhalation, and then her voice, calm and empty, saying, "I'm staying. They need more voices." Isaiah Crow tried to warn people. He posted one final message on the park's internal cultural advisory board. The covenant is broken. They're not remembering anymore. They're collecting. 2 days later, his truck was found idling near the Beckler trailhead, keys still in the ignition, passenger seat covered in dew, and a single quartz stone resting on the driver's seat, glowing faintly blue in the pre-dawn light. When rangers touched it, they all reported the same thing: a sudden, overwhelming urge to walk into the trees and not look back. The worst came during the winter solstice. A family of 4, visiting from Illinois, failed to check out of their cabin at Old Faithful Snow Lodge. Rangers found the room spotless, beds neatly made, suitcases packed, but on the nightstand, 4 steaming mugs of cocoa and 4 quartz stones, arranged in a perfect circle. The parents' phones were left charging. The last text, sent at 11:58 p.m., read simply, "They're so quiet now. We get to be quiet too." No search was launched. The park quietly closed the Beckler region indefinitely, citing geothermal instability. But staff whisper that the real reason is the sound, or rather, the lack of it. In sectors near the hollow, even the wind has gone silent. Animals avoid the area. Birds fall quiet when flying overhead. And at night, if you stand near the Firehole River with your back to the trees, you might feel it. A breath on your neck that isn't yours. because the listening is over. Now the shadows are speaking, and they're calling your name, not to comfort you, but to replace you.